Welcome to the debate. Today we are looking at the mathematics of survival and I guess the geometry of community. We are dissecting the architecture of density, multifamily residential. In the industry, we often just call it the MDU, the multi-dwelling unit.
MDU, it sounds a little like a prison designation, doesn't it? And frankly, for a lot of history, that comparison, it wasn't too far off. We aren't just talking about buildings today. We are talking about what is, arguably the single most volatile flashpoint in urban politics. This is where zoning wars are fought. It's where neighborhoods are either made or segregated.
It is controversial, yes. But let's ground this in a quick definition. When we say multifamily residential, we're classifying any housing where separate residential units are contained within one building or one complex. And the spectrum is just massive. It runs from, say, the humble duplex next door, all the way to the soaring apartment tower downtown. And the core question we really need to answer is, does this form represent the pinnacle of fiscal and communal efficiency, a necessary evolution? Or is it, as you usually insist, a tool for exclusion?
I'm insisting it's a compromise, and often a pretty dangerous one. My argument is that you simply cannot separate the building from its baggage. The history of the MDU, from the Industrial Revolution slums to the exclusionary zoning maps of today, it's a history of class conflict.
And I'm here to argue that the data overrides that history. Multifamily housing is the superior model for fiscal stability and, yes, for physical safety. It offers higher per capita value and beneficial externalities that we ignore at our own financial peril. I'm speaking for the form itself, really, and its potential to save our cities.
The potential is one thing. The reality, that's another. So let's hear your case.
My stance is the case for fiscal and physical superiority. We need to stop looking at apartments as just choices and start looking at them as economic engines. When you analyze the tax revenue per acre, multifamily settings consistently, and I mean consistently, outperform single-family homes. This isn't just about developer profit. This is about municipal solvency.
Solvency for the city, perhaps, but usually that comes at the cost of the living standards of the people inside.
And that right there is the myth I want to shatter. Look at the Gallagher study from 2016. It's a pivotal piece of research. Gallagher analyzed the fiscal impact of different housing types and found that multifamily housing generates, quote, beneficial fiscal externalities. In plain English, these buildings generate more tax revenue for the infrastructure they consume than low-density sprawl does. They effectively subsidize the single-family homeowners who complain about them.
Right. You're making the tax argument. It's the favorite weapon of the modern urbanist.
Because it's irrefutable math. And while we're on the subject of myths, let's talk about safety. At every zoning hearing, you hear the same fear. Density is dangerous. What about fires? The 2025 Pew data completely inverts this. Modern multifamily buildings provide the highest level of fire protection. Thanks to strict code requirements, sprinkler systems, fire-rated separations, they are a lower fire hazard than your average detached home. This is the evolution of community, from the Roman insulae to today. It's just humans living closer for mutual benefit.
You mentioned the Roman insulae. It's worth remembering that those were notorious death traps, prone to collapse and fire, built by slumlords to warehouse the plebs. And that brings me right to my stance. The case for historical friction and exclusion. You see an efficiency chart, I see a history of unwanted housing.
Unwanted by the market or unwanted by the neighbors?
Unwanted by the political structure. In the United States specifically, zoning laws are weaponized. Huge swaths of land are zoned strictly for single-family homes, not to preserve character, but to actively prohibit the MDU. It is a deliberate barrier. And historically, these bans weren't subtle at all. They were explicit efforts to keep racial minorities and the working poor out of specific school districts, out of specific neighborhoods.
But that's a critique of the regulation, not the architecture itself. You can't blame the brick for the law.
The brick is the law in physical form. When you look at the research, affluent homeowners are the most likely people to oppose these developments. And why? Because they don't see fiscal externalities. They see tenements, they see rooming houses, they see a threat to their property values and their social standing. You cannot discuss the MDU without discussing the class warfare that prevents it from being built.
Perception is a powerful drug, I'll grant you that. But innovation is the antidote. And this brings us to the design itself. You claim these buildings are compromises. I see them as brilliant adaptations to constraints.
Adaptations or just boxes stacked to maximize yield?
Well, let's look at the most ubiquitous example in North America right now, the 1+5. You've seen them everywhere. 5 stories of wood-framed residential sitting on top of a concrete podium, which is usually retail or parking.
Oh, I've seen them. It's impossible to miss them. They all look exactly the same.
They look similar because they solve the specific code equation. It's a structural innovation that allows for rapid, safe densification using cheaper materials, wood, while maintaining fire safety through that concrete podium separation. It helps solve the housing supply crisis. Is it a little repetitive? Maybe. But it is democratizing access to the city.
It's aesthetic distinctiveness, 0. But I'll give you a global counterpoint. You want to talk about adaptation? Look at the toothpick apartments in Hong Kong. We are talking about buildings maybe 20 stories high, built on these tiny lots, sometimes with only 1 apartment per floor.
That is extreme density. Yes, I'll grant you that.
It's precarious. It is the architectural manifestation of desperation. These pencil towers, they're surrounded by shorter buildings, blocking light and air. It feels temporary, even if it's made of concrete.
You pick the extreme, but then you ignore the shop house or the Tong Lao in Southeast Asia. I mean, that is the same concept, density on a small lot, but perfected. You have the family business on the ground floor, open to the street, and then the residential quarters above. It creates a mixed-use environment just organically. It's vibrant. A subdivision of detached homes is a graveyard compared to a street of Tong Lao.
The Tong Lao has charm, I admit. But for every charming shop house, there is a dingbat.
The dingbat? Oh, come on, that's strictly a Los Angeles phenomenon. But it represents a specific mindset. The dingbat style is a boxy 2-story apartment building on stilts hovering over a carport. It is the ultimate expression of prioritizing the car over the human.
Or take the 4+1 that took over Chicago in the 60s and 70s. Masonry and wood, 4 stories over a parking lot. These designs weren't about community evolution. They were about squeezing the maximum number of renters onto a lot while meeting minimum parking requirements. It's just cynical architecture.
I would frame it as providing essential housing stock. And you're ignoring the beautiful iterations. Look at the garden apartment. Low-rise, semi-detached, surrounded by green space. Or the brownstone in New York. Technically, a brownstone is just a row house, a multifamily density form, and yet it is highly coveted. It proves that density can be desirable.
A brownstone is desirable now because it has been gentrified. But let's talk about the interior experience of those older forms. Had you ever actually lived in a railroad apartment?
I know the layout. It's linear, front to back.
It's a privacy nightmare. The rooms are linked directly with no hallway to save space. So to get from the living room to the kitchen, you might have to walk through someone's bedroom. That is the architecture of density forcing a loss of dignity. It prioritized the efficiency of the floor plan over the privacy of the human being.
It was a layout born of necessity and lot shape, but people adapted. And that adaptation leads to ownership, which is where the real debate lies. We often assume MDU means renting, and single-family means owning. But the legal structures of the MDU are where true community innovation really happens.
I'm skeptical that a legal contract really changes the physical reality of sharing a wall.
Oh, it changes everything. Look at the intentional community, specifically the housing cooperative, or co-op. In a co-op, you don't own your unit. A nonprofit corporation owns the building, and you own shares in that corporation. It is a deeply democratic, almost socialist way of living that functions within a capitalist market. Or the condominium. I mean, you aren't just buying a box of air. You are buying into co-ownership of the common areas, the roof, the boiler. It forces collective responsibility.
In theory, yes. But the vocabulary, it reveals the class divide again. You say co-op and condo, and we picture respectable middle-class stability. But let's look at the other side of that coin, the British bedsit or the Indian mess.
Which are vital entry points to the urban economy. A mess or a bedsit offers a single room with shared facilities. It allows students, bachelors, and low-wage earners to actually live in the city where they work. Without them, the city just becomes a fortress for the rich.
Or they become high-density slums. That is how they were historically viewed and often how they functioned. In Glasgow, between 1800 and 1870, they built high-density housing called the Close. In Liverpool and Leeds, it was the Court, terraced, back-to-back housing clustered around these dead-end alleys.
You're going back to the Victorian era again.
Because the stigma persists. These courts had no ventilation, no sunlight, and shared open sewers. The terms became synonymous with squalor, and that linguistic baggage traveled. Take the word tenement. Technically, it just means a large apartment building. But in the United States, you cannot say tenement without implying a rundown, dangerous building. Words matter. When you propose a multifamily unit in a wealthy suburb, they don't hear condominium. They hear tenement. They hear SRO, single room occupancy.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes we must be held hostage by Victorian sanitation failures. The SRO, frankly, is a tragedy that we lost. We zoned them out of existence in the name of urban renewal, and homelessness spiked almost immediately. The mess, the boarding house, these were flexible housing options. By stigmatizing them, we destroyed the bottom rung of the housing ladder.
We didn't just stigmatize them. We associated them with a specific, quote, lesser form of citizen. Affluent homeowners oppose multifamily housing, and this is citing Manville and Monconan's research, because they associate it with transient populations. The rooming house, where leases run week to week. That creates a very different social fabric than the 30-year mortgage. You call it flexibility, the neighbors call it instability.
Which leads us directly into the political resistance, the NIMBY factor, not in my backyard. And I want to return to the data here. The resistance to these buildings is often framed as protecting neighborhood character, but it is just irrational when you look at how people actually try to live.
Is it irrational, or is it calculated economic protectionism?
It's irrational because even in strict single-family zones, people are desperately hacking the code to create multifamily efficiency. Look at the mother-in-law apartment or the granny flat. These are secondary suites tucked into basements. Or the garage apartment and the garlow.
A garlow?
It's a portmanteau of garage and bungalow. A garage and an apartment at the same level. The point is, people are breaking the single-family model because they need density. The 2-flat or 3-flat, so common in Chicago or New England's triple-deckers, creates a perfect middle ground. These are stackable units that fit on a standard lot. The market is screaming for this. The NIMBY resistance is fighting against organic demand.
But the NIMBY resistance is powerful because it is rooted in something much deeper than just architecture. I want to reference the work of Luis Flores from 2024. He argues that zoning is a labor market regulation.
That's a bold claim. How does a building code regulate labor?
By banning multifamily housing, you are effectively regulating who can live, and therefore who can work, in a specific area. It excludes the service class. The resistance is deeply rooted in preserving a specific, exclusionary social order. It's not just that they don't like the look of a deck access block.
Right. Deck access does have a bad reputation, largely due to the brutalist era. Long external walkways, cold concrete.
It's not just the deck access. It's the Plattenbau of East Germany or the Panelec in the Czech Republic. These massive concrete slab towers became symbols of state control and uniformity. When a community activist stands up and says, "We don't want high-rises here," they are channeling the ghost of the Plattenbau. They are fighting against the visual language of warehousing people. They see a loss of individuality.
But that's a caricature. We aren't building Soviet-era concrete slabs anymore. We are building luxury apartments with gyms and pools. We're building mixed-use developments that reduce car dependency. To cling to the fear of the Plattenbau in 2026 is to deny the reality of the modern penthouse or the loft conversion.
The loft conversion is an interesting pivot, though, taking a warehouse, a place of labor, and turning it into housing for the wealthy. But that is gentrification, which brings its own political battles. The point I'm making is that the MDU is never just a building. It is a signal, and for many, it signals a loss of control over their environment.
And for many others, it signals opportunity. It signals a place to live that is affordable, safe, and connected.
I think we've reached the crux of the disagreement. We're looking at the same structures but seeing two completely different histories.
Indeed. So, let's summarize the case for density. Multifamily residential, whether it's the high-rise penthouse, the humble duplex, or the efficient 1+5, is the fiscal savior of the modern community. The data is clear. These structures lower tax burdens, maximize value per capita, and provide superior fire safety compared to the sprawl of single-family homes. It is an evolving, necessary solution. We should be encouraging the two-flat, the garden apartment, and yes, even the micro-apartment, not banning them out of irrational fear.
And I will conclude by saying that while the efficiency is undeniable, the MDU carries the heavy weight of historical class warfare. From the back-to-back terraces of the Industrial Revolution to the tenements of New York, this housing form has been the stage for our society's struggle with inequality. The zoning battles we see today are not new. They are echoes of the attempts to segregate the close and the court from the respectable street. It is a necessary form, I agree, but it is one defined by a perpetual struggle for acceptance and for dignity.
It's remarkable how a simple building classification, MDU, can reveal such deep societal fissures regarding race, class, and how we choose to live together.
Absolutely. It forces us to ask who our neighbors are, and maybe more importantly, who we allow them to be.
A question worth pondering. Join us next time on The Debate.